Hi, Outbosses. My name is Derrick Reyes, and I'm an Outboss as well.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, we are welcoming Derrick Reyes, joining us all the way from the Big Apple. Derrick, are you ready to inspire fellow Out Bosses?
Yes, always.
Yes. Well, I'm psyched for this interview. So for those of you who don't know Derrick, they are a Latinx, non-binary, queer, native New Yorker, and a child of immigrants who is the co-founder and CEO of Queerly Health. Queerly Health is a New York City-based startup leveraging digital health to ensure LGBTQ plus communities gain access to safe, affirming, and culturally responsive healthcare for folks living across the U.S. And I'm sure you probably have grand designs for going beyond the U.S. So we'll talk about that, Derrick. But a little bit about Derrick's background. They have a history of working in the nonprofit sector and a background in clinical research as it relates to serving LGBTQ plus communities. And Derrick earned a MA in Human Development and Social Intervention, along with an advanced certification in LGBTQ health, education, and social services from my alma mater, NYU. I love that certification exists. The world is definitely changing. So Derrick, welcome again to the show. To get us started, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about what Queerly Health is all about and what makes it unique?
Thanks for having me. So Queerly Health, basically what we're doing is we're leveraging the booming digital health market to circumvent the barriers to access that a lot of the LGBTQ community faces when we go to try to access the health and wellness services that we need.
That's awesome. I love that it's like you have that so concise. So let's just unravel that a little bit, because we've got a number of LGBT bosses tuning in, some of whom, I'm sure we've all navigated the healthcare industrial complex in one way or the other, some of us more successfully than others. Why do you think that this is so needed, and what makes what you're doing unique? For perspective, for people that aren't a part of the kind of this booming digital health industry, when you look at that industry, how many other kind of companies or organizations exist doing what you're doing?
There's a few telehealth companies out there, digital health companies that cater to the general population, and then a few that cater to sort of a more specific population, like women's health. But there aren't any that cater specifically to the LGBTQ community.
Yeah. And, with your background in LGBT health and education and social services, why is something like what you're developing so necessary? Can you just share with us a little bit about the realities that so many of us in the rainbow community experience when just trying to access healthcare?
Yeah, so the five major barriers that we're focusing on are cost, which every American can pretty much relate to, and discrimination is another one where more than half of the LGBTQ community experiences discrimination in healthcare settings, including 29% of trans people that are just flat out denied health and wellness services. So a lot of this discrimination in healthcare settings can range anywhere from, no, you can't come in here, we don't treat people like you, all the way to physical assault. And another barrier is lack of provider knowledge. So a lot of the healthcare providers that currently exist and are currently being trained up in healthcare institutions, they're not really being taught about LGBTQ health, at least not in a comprehensive way. The consensus that I've gotten is maybe it's a 5-minute module and it's all about HIV prevention and or treatment. And that only begins to scratch the surface of LGBTQ health and wellness. Another huge barrier is anti-LGBTQ health laws. So that varies state by state. More than half of the states in this country have at some point at least proposed an anti-LGBTQ health law that would restrict what LGBTQ people can do when it comes to their health and wellness, and protects providers that would discriminate against us. And just last month, the current administration in this country at the federal level introduced 2 rules that would make it a lot more difficult for us to find the health and wellness services and providers that we need as well. So, yeah, those are pretty much the major barriers that we're looking to not tackle straight on, but just circumvent it because you can use technology to sort of go around these problems.
Okay, so that was a lot. I mean, 5 significant barriers. I guess my first question before we get into some of the barriers, you are super successful with introducing, from what I know, pre kind of our conversation here, you're busy raising money for what you're doing. And clearly you're having an impact because you're successful in getting some of the seed funding. As you go to these pitch festivals and people say, why are you focusing so narrowly around LGBT communities? And when you share some of these barriers, what are some of the responses that you get from people? I mean, is there an awareness about like some of these realities, or are people really shook, as I would imagine, when you're talking about, it's not just one barrier. I mean, these are pretty system wide. I mean, the fact that like alone leading medical providers, probably coming from some of the best institutions, get a 5-minute module on HIV prevention, which my God, I hope they were getting in 1980, right? But like, I mean, there's so many other specific disparities that impact LGBT people. I'm just curious, like those general audiences, how do they receive your pitch and just kind of that education that you're doing as you're trying to build out your business?
Yeah, so usually what I end up doing is I'm either an educator on LGBTQ health or an educator on digital health, or sometimes both. So oftentimes when I talk about LGBTQ health to people who weren't aware beforehand of all the obstacles we have to navigate just to get the care that the general population can get really easily. People are pretty amazed. They're pretty dumbfounded by that fact. I've had people come up to me literally in tears and share stories about their own experiences navigating the healthcare industry in this country, their siblings' experiences navigating the healthcare industry in this country, or their friends or other family members. And really, it's something that I think people by and large would like to see, that everyone is taken care of, no matter who they are or who they love.
Yeah, and just by doing that, people are making those connections themselves. And so through educating, what it sounds like, from my perspective, is that you're able to really build those bridges and close the empathy gaps so that, people can relate, but then they can also appreciate some of those pretty specific challenges that show up for LGBT folks. And one of those that you had mentioned was this rule that was introduced last month by, well, at the time of the recording, we're recording in June, introduced by the current administration on the Health and Human Services Division. And this is a rule that essentially would allow basically almost every kind of healthcare professional to refuse services if an individual runs afoul of their personal or religious beliefs, which is it's pretty widespread, and these professionals can also deny sharing medical information about potential treatments. So that rule will be in effect July 22nd, possibly with some modifications, and already there's been threats of a lawsuit between the ACLU and Planned Parenthood to kind of to speak out against this proposed rule. So that's context. But, in terms of what you're doing, you talked about how Queerly Health as an app can circumvent connecting LGBT communities with providers, well, to avoid providers that would, exercise this new broad sweeping rule. But how? Can you just kind of explain how, someone who might be, I'll use my home state, but in a rural part of Florida, like maybe in the Panhandle, say they're trans, say they're non-binary, how could they get connected with healthcare professionals that are open to seeing them, open to affirming who they are, and more specifically, have the competency to serve them for whatever their needs are?
So another huge barrier is location,
Mm.
because as you're mentioning, in the Florida Panhandle, I'm not sure what the climate there is like for LGBTQ health, although we're looking into every state and every area. If you live in a major metropolitan area on either of the coasts, you can kind of find LGBTQ healthcare a little bit easier than the rest of the country, the rural parts of the country, the middle of the country. So when it comes to navigating things like location and anti-LGBTQ health legislation and any of the other barriers, first of all, providers have to sort of self-select to be on our platform. So these are providers that, regardless of any encoded legislation that basically encodes discrimination, they are already the ones that this applies to them, our platform. So location is something that we can circumvent just by the nature of the platform itself. It's through the internet. It's a virtual clinic online. It's an online marketplace. It's telehealth. So it takes care of the physical problem there. And then the majority of these anti-LGBTQ health laws, I think they mostly focus on protecting providers that want to discriminate, basically. So anyone who wants to be on our platform are not those people, because we'll be vetting and training them.
Yeah, and that's terrific. So a provider learns about what you're doing, really believes in it, has some experience, or is willing to. I'm sure there's some education that you're also offering, or eventually will. So kind of bringing them up to speed and kind of really adding this robust clearinghouse of folks ready, willing, and able to serve LGBT people. And I mean, just this moment in time, we really need what you're doing. So I thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Recognizing that our audience is largely a group of LGBT business owners and some tremendous allies, and then just LGBT folks interested in the content that we talk about. What's one thing about the world of accessing affirming healthcare that this audience may not know, but they ought to?
I think knowing that around 60% of the LGBTQ population that lives in this country lives in a state where they can be dropped by their health insurance company if they're queer and or trans. That's a big one, because when you're shopping around for these companies and these plans, you want to make sure that you find a company that has a good track record with the LGBTQ community and the LGBTQ population that's not going to give you any problems down the line. And I think it's really a responsibility of a lot of the people who are in companies that are offering these services to their employees, their employee benefits packages. It's really up to them to do that sort of vetting of what's out there, the resources that are out there, to make sure that it's inclusive of everybody.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for saying that. As business owners, especially if you have full-time employees or you're offering insurance, however you've set that up, it's our responsibility to really dig into those plans. Maybe you have someone on HR that does that for you, but really looking at that stat, which is shocking to me, and I'm not totally sure of the dynamics of how that all works, but to avoid it altogether is really having, a set of core questions to go into talking with health insurance representatives and really saying, hey, I'm a member of the LGBT community, or, I'm an ally of, and I have LGBT staff. This is important. What are you doing in terms of covering these specific kinds of healthcare needs, and being informed about that from the beginning, because ultimately you're the customer, you have that negotiating power. So yeah, I think that's good stuff. So Derrick, really quickly, we're going to go to a sponsorship break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about your business origin story. Hey, Outbosses, Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBT entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business. To know that you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting business. In fact, I'm on a mission to empower leaders just like you and those on their way to joining us to cultivate cultures of belonging. In my upcoming book, Belonging at Work, I share some of my personal struggles of coming out as a trans guy in the workplace and how I leverage this experience as one of my business superpowers. Now, I'm on a mission to support you in taking simple actions that will make a world of difference for anyone who has ever felt as if they needed to hide important aspects of themselves on the job. When you commit to purchasing a special, limited edition copy of the book, a portion of your purchase will support expanding workplace opportunities for fellow transgender and non-binary people. An added bonus, your story about what it means to belong at work will be featured on the book's website to inspire others. You're ready to belong at work now. To learn more, visit Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type the word belong. Again, that's Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type belong. Okay, Derrick, so we didn't really touch on this. We talked a lot about Queerly Health, but I'm curious, what was your motivation for starting this particular business enterprise? When did you get the idea and kind of what was going on in your life at that point in time?
Sure. So I had this idea, and it's morphed. It started as a baby idea, and now it's grown up into this huge thing. I originally had this idea to sort of do kind of like a crowdsourced Yelp type of thing for the LGBTQ community when it came to health and wellness providers. And I had that idea right after grad school. And I had studied LGBTQ risk and resilience and LGBTQ health disparities and LGBTQ counseling and all these other things. And I saw just, first of all, the disparities that we have to live with just because we don't have adequate access. It just shouldn't even be that way. Mm-hmm. And then I kept seeing it over and over with myself personally, navigating I was someone who was very educated on navigating the system, and even I had trouble navigating it as an adult and also as a youth, not that long ago. But I also saw the way that my friends were navigating it, the people that I worked with, and it just came up over and over again that access was this huge problem and it had this huge impact on the community, and it just wasn't an okay thing to live with. So I was working in the field for a while, kept seeing this over and over, and I started to learn how to code. And I was a bit of a techie pretty much always, but I went into the nonprofit space, research space. So I really wanted to do anything and everything I could to affect LGBTQ health. And then I really started seeing how the digital health space was just, there's so many things now. I mean, there's even several apps now that are basically telehealth for veterinarians. You can pull up an app and video chat a veterinarian for your dog or cat if they're not feeling well. I just remember thinking like, this can be such a solution if implemented correctly to the huge access problem that the LGBTQ community is having, because it can circumvent so many of our barriers to access. So I really had to invest a lot of time and energy and trainings and seek out mentorship from people for about 3 years before I actually started working on Queerly Health. Before I created Queerly Health, I had to create the CEO of Queerly Health, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I had to build myself up into the person that I needed to be in order to launch this thing.
Yeah.
So if I can give anyone listening that tidbit, it's to really work on yourself first and then launch what it is you're looking to launch and or build or create. And every time that Queerly Health has to level up out there in the world, I have to level up with it or level up right before it in order to make sure that it's taken care of. I started to learn how to code. I started to get involved in the tech scene. I started asking around for advice on how to do something like this. I started to build a team of mentors and advisors for myself. And eventually, one day last September, I was coding and I was wondering if getting prepared to one day launch this and readying myself to one day do this, if that was all just secretly disempowering context to not actually work on it. So what I did was I threw it out there into the universe. I participated in a Latinx in Tech Startup Weekend organized by the Caper Center and Techstars. And I participated in that a full weekend at the end of September 2018. And Queerly Health won twice, crowd favorite and
Yeah.
first place.
Awesome.
And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah. That's so incredible. I mean, I feel like you've just kind of like broken down one of the more foundational business books, like Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, where it's just really what you're talking about. Trying to build the CEO position before you build Queerly Health is really, we've talked about this before on our kind of office hours. Is like when you're thinking about coming up with your business ideas, one, like what's the problem that you're solving? But then two, like how do you switch your mindset? And for many of us who tune into this show, at some point, we've worked for other people as employees. So how do you shift from that employee mindset to an entrepreneur mindset? And not just an entrepreneur mindset, but a mindset of a CEO kind of running the thing and holding that vision true and then building the team around you. And then you spoke really nicely about mentors, sponsors, a team of advisors, and knowing that like you alone, I mean, you can learn as much as you can, be the smartest that you can in what you're building. And, if you can connect with people who are a little bit ahead of you, who've done something maybe similar, but at least have had the kind of framework of building a business, that's like the rocket fuel that really launches the thing that you're trying to do. And kudos to you for, that origin story is really powerful. And I thank you for breaking that down, just kind of your own process. I think that's really helpful. And I hope for those tuning in who are kind of, thinking about the next Yelp idea that they have or app idea, it's just hang on to that and talk with people that you trust and really, that kind of baby idea can grow up like Queerly Health and become a really powerful force for change. Yeah, one of the other questions that I ask, and this is kind of you wearing the CEO cap, you're thinking about the team or the type of organization that you're building on workplace culture, right? So we talk about healthcare not being so affirming for a variety of underrepresented communities, including LGBT folks and those living at the intersections. For you, as you're building your business, what's maybe one thing that you're trying to do to create a more inclusive environment for those that you work with, those that you might contract with, your ideal kind of customers opting into Queerly Health, especially kind of centering folks who often feel excluded by the workplace? Or in the workplace.
Sure. Yeah. So I have my experiences with my identities. And I knew when I was creating my team for Queerly Health that I had to include people not just who had expertise in areas that I didn't have expertise, but also in identities that I didn't share as well. So for me, I made sure that, for example, one of my co-founders, she's absolutely brilliant and her background is amazing and she's such a fit for Queerly Health. And she actually came to me and I was so happy when she did because for months I was like, how am I going to woo her away from what she's doing? She's a woman and I was like, my technical co-founder and I, like, I'm non-binary, but I've always had the privilege of being cis-presenting as male. And my co-founder is male. And I was like, if this is going to be a company for everybody, I need like gender represented across the spectrum, all the way up at the top first. And the culture and the talks about company culture and the culture we're going to be creating on our platform and everyone working with us, that we had those conversations from the very beginning. Like literally it was the three of us. Yeah. And now our team is growing and we have these guidelines for what our expectations are. Like, how do we want to nurture and grow our employees? How do we want to advocate not just for LGBTQ people, but for health justice and health equity as a whole? Because the LGBTQ community, we're one of those few communities out there that cuts across every other community on the planet. So across gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, countries, everything.
Mhm.
So we wanted to make sure that we, on this platform and what we're building, we're not just inclusive of LGBTQ people in general. We're trying to be inclusive of everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that I really love what you're saying, thinking about this culture piece intentionally from the beginning and recognizing that it starts from the top and how you reflect that, how you reflect those values, both in obviously what you're talking about, but also visually, those kind of quick optics that folks from the outside may make a whole variety of assumptions. And you're thinking about that in really sophisticated ways, which does make a world of difference. And that gives me hope for the work that I do with different organizations, that the next generation is really thinking about this in way more dynamic ways, or at least coming up with new strategies on how to actualize this idea if we want to speak to communities that cut across different intersections. And I agree with you. I mean, when we think about sexual orientation and gender identity, everybody on this planet has one, whether or not they think about it. Mm-hmm. And so, that's an additional responsibility that we have. Okay, so last question on really focused on queerly health, which is right now in this moment for you, what's making your heart sing? What are you most inspired about with what's kind of on the agenda for the next quarter, the next year? What's lighting you up?
Sure. So we have our first event ever coming up next week on Thursday in New York City. We partnered with Samsung Next to celebrate Pride and LGBTQ founders. So it's really just the way that people have been so receptive to queerly health and offer their support and their time and their expertise and their connections. It's just been I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to do this. And even when things require work, it just feels right. I'm I kind of wish I started doing this sooner, but I'm also everything happens at the right time. Mm-hmm. So really our events coming up next week, that's really I'm just so grateful to be able to do that now this Pride Month and celebrating 50 years of Stonewall as well. And I want to say that I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if it wasn't for all of the queer and trans, especially queer and trans people of color that have come before me and sort of paved the way and really laid the groundwork for me to be able to do this. I'm not self-made. Lots of people have poured into the vessel that is me, including my queer and trans ancestors. And I'm really standing on their shoulders in order to be able to do this. I'm really excited for the next 50 years.
Yes, I love that.
LGBTQ equity.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And it's just, by the time the show airs, it will be post the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, right? Just the things that are happening around the world to recognize and remember is super important. And specifically in New York City, where the Stonewall Inn is located, the fact that the statues honoring Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who have long been just not elevated to what I think where they should be in terms of their status, and the fact that I think these are the first statues honoring queer, trans people of color. Although if I'm wrong, please let me know. But I think, at least in New York City, that this is a first. It's really historic, and they're enshrined for forever, and I think that's super important. And the fact that you as a super successful business owner really recognizing the folks that have come before, these legends that are a part of our history, and keeping their memory alive just through kind of our oral tradition of sharing stories is super, super valuable. Because still, and especially I'm sure as you travel across the country, talking with audiences who are not LGBT, many people don't know who these folks are. And so I'm just really happy to see that this recognition is happening, and the more that we can do that, and the influence that we wield to get our stories out there more broadly is super powerful. So thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit more about what brings you to the Rainbow family, Derrick. And I always like to kind of ask this question. It's probably one of the harder questions. because it's not, it's hard. I'll just say that. But can you think of a time, maybe you were working for someone else, and I doubt this is happening at Queerly Health, where you felt you couldn't bring your whole self to work? Maybe you couldn't talk about your gender history or just kind of how you think about your gender as a non-binary person. Like, what was going on in that workplace scenario that made you feel like, maybe I don't really fit in here, I don't belong? And how did you work around that? And I like to ask this question just because there are folks who tune in who, I mean, we struggle with this every day. We come out again and again, and it's all about safety, trust, rapport. And in the workplace, I mean, sometimes it could mean if we share some of our truths about our sexual orientation or gender identity, I mean, for many of us, we can lose our jobs, and that's just reality. So what comes up for you? What might be an incident that you can share some insight in terms of how you worked around it?
That's a good question. And it's something that people shouldn't have to navigate that, but that's the reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've always been pretty out and about who I am, including in my previous jobs. But I've definitely encountered situations where I felt maybe my identities as a queer and trans non-binary person made others perceive me as maybe not a whole person or a whole employee.
Mm-hmm.
And one particular instance comes to mind where I was hired to work on a research team that very specifically was going to be enlisting participants that were part of the LGBTQ community. And I was like the first LGBTQ hire for this research team. And they brought me on board to also make sure that our team was more LGBTQ inclusive. And then when I started building out this whole staff assessment to give out to everyone in our clinic to gauge where everyone was with LGBTQ inclusivity so we can build trainings around it and all this, the person who hired me to do this very work asked in a staff meeting, is Derrick even qualified to do this? And then they got up and they left. And everyone in the room was just kind of stunned because I had to rely on my cisgender and heterosexual coworkers to be like, this is exactly what we hired Derrick for. Yes, Derrick is qualified to do this. So that's one point where I just really sticks with me because, as someone who's queer, trans, brown, first generation, the only person in my family to go to college, imposter syndrome is real.
Mm-hmm.
And something like that triggered my imposter syndrome to like level 9,000.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, that's something now that I know how to deal with. But at the time, the word that comes to mind is invalidating. Those experiences are invalidating for people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I would encourage folks to lean on their coworkers with the privilege to speak up for you.
Yeah, like leaning on coworkers and other folks that can vouch for you. As you kind of summarize this experience into one word as invalidating, some of I was kind of jotting down notes as you were speaking. A couple of things that came up for me. This kind of tokenization of like, oh, we want to diversify our team, and just like we're hiring Derrick, and it kind of goes back to someone questioning your qualifications when it's the very person who saw your resume and made the hiring decision. It's like, of course you're qualified, right? But it's also like this thing that I think comes up for underrepresented groups across identities. And, as a trans person, I've seen this enough, of just this underestimation of what you truly can do, what your potential is. And you're right, like it definitely can fire up that imposter syndrome. And I'm curious, you had said like at the time that this happened, you're still kind of like building up your muscles of how to navigate imposter syndrome. I mean, this is something that we talk about on the show a lot. It's like imposter syndrome, imposter complex, not good enough, whatever. Like now, when it comes up, because it does, as you run a business, like what are some strategies that you look to just to kind of help you work through it, and just be like, oh, there you are again. Okay, and you manage it and you move on. Like, you have like one or two things that you might want to share with the audience that could be helpful for us?
Yeah, I heard someone, a woman of color, say at a conference at the start of this year, she said, have a faith in yourself that's unshakable.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me for the rest of 2019 because I now I recognize what I can or can't do. I recognize my limitations. And then whatever I don't have expertise in, I will hire someone with that expertise. Where before that might
Yeah.
have been something that, could trigger like oh, I'm not good enough to do this. And now I'm just like, no, I just recognize I'm not a marketing person, so I need one.
Yes. You're thinking like
That's
the CEO
how
that you are. Yes, exactly.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
how I operate now. And also, imposter syndrome, this is disempowering. It's disempowering context, really. And I've had to do a lot of work and sort of peel back like an onion all these layers of disempowering context that I've taken on over the years to really be able to be my full self in what I'm doing. And it's for me and it's for what I'm building and the impact that this company is going to have on people. People's imposter syndrome, they don't hold a candle to your full potential realized at all.
Mhm.
And really what I see this near future, we're all healthcare settings are LGBTQ inclusive. Like that holds way more weight than, oh, I don't think I'm good enough in this
Oh,
moment
yeah.
for this thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that quote, have a faith in yourself that is unshakable, is so rooted in this kind of concept that I feel like you really embody. As a social entrepreneur, you are very clear on what your purpose is, which is, you just said it, all LGBT or all healthcare centers in the future will be LGBT inclusive. It will be seamless, and you're addressing it through this app. Like you're disrupting kind of the status quo right now, and you're putting pressure to make that change. You just go to that. I mean, what a cause. No matter what. Okay, so you might have a marketing issue pop up. Big deal. Like, see the big picture, and you've got that vision. And I think that's so powerful. So I think for other folks that are kind of like, I kind of want to do this thing, and I'm not really sure. Like, if it makes your heart sing, and you feel like it's going to make the world better, you got something there. Like, go for it. It's
Absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. So just kind of the flip, because I like the more empowering side of the show. You've got a lot of lived experiences, right? I mean, you talked about being a queer, trans, brown, first generation New Yorker, from those lived experiences. And, if you kind of want to center some of those experiences around being a part of the rainbow family, how do you think that sets you apart from other folks in the healthcare sector in particular? Like, where are your superpowers coming from, just being a part of the rainbow family and some of the other experiences that you have from just feeling underestimated or just being undervalued, Like, how do you stand out from those experiences?
Recently, I've been wondering a lot about how I define success. And it really hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized I'm 30 years old and not a lot of people with the identities I have get to make it to 30 years old. A lot of us don't get to make it to 25 or 20 or 15 or 10. And I realized that was success in and of itself, to just be in this body with these identities at 30 years old.
Yeah.
And all of my experiences have made me incredibly resilient, which makes me incredibly resilient with what I'm building now. I mean, when I go in to speak with investors or accelerators or potential partners, there's very little anyone can throw at me that's gonna shake me up right now because of the path that I've already have walked and that so many of us have walked through already. I think LGBTQ people, incredibly resilient. We're incredibly resourceful. We make fantastic entrepreneurs. We make fantastic founders of anything. I don't care what it is, basket weaving. You will be the best basket weaver on the planet.
Yes. Yeah. I completely agree with that. I mean, we talk a lot about being the architects of our own lives because it's not like there's like a manual out there of like how to navigate being trans or how to navigate being pansexual. It's like, you know, we have each other, you know, we have these very strong communities, and I agree with you. It's like being resilient, resourceful, unflappable. Like those are the same qualities that, like you said, you know, the fact that you're alive, that are keeping you alive, and not just alive, thriving, right? That those are very transferable to thinking about, okay, if I've figured out how to navigate my life in a way that most of the world still doesn't understand or affirms, how can I do, you know, surviving in capitalism better, you know, or like do things that make me feel like I'm contributing to making the world a better place. And you're a great example of that. You're doing it. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for that advice and that guidance. And Derrick, just two more questions for you. And the first is a big question. You know, we are thinking about kind of next generation entrepreneurs, and for those folks who are just thinking about making that leap, no matter how old their age is on the planet, but just kind of young entrepreneurs, what advice would you give them to kind of make friends with the fear that's there and move past it and jump, but to allow them to be their most authentic selves as they go through that process?
Funny enough, I think launching what we're building at Queerly Health, working on this has made me be more authentic with myself. It was just part of the process. As you're creating what you want to create yourself to be the person that is going to be running this or being a part of this. So I think for me, it was really important to, after almost 30 years of trying with gender and being a gender failure, I just had to let it go. I'm not trying to be anything that I'm not. So that's where I finally started dressing how I wanted to dress and wearing the red lip that I wanted to wear and just being myself authentically. And I get that a lot of times with us, we have to choose between our full self-expression and our authenticity and like our safety. It's real. And I think whatever you have to do to get yourself up to the point where every day you're taking at least a tiny step towards authenticity, it's really just going to open so many doors for you.
Absolutely. That's such awesome advice. And just like one observation about gender and who you are in the world, I would say you're gender fabulous. So kind of the rewrite of like the cis het world of gender failure, like gender fabulous. Like you're like not only kind of like showing up authentically for yourself, you're a possibility model for other people around like freeing up and getting a little more liberated around kind of what the society, whatever your culture and society that you're in, wherever you're listening, was telling you, you know, how to be a man or how to be a woman or whatever. It's like, as someone who is non-binary, and for me, like as a trans person, I think that's like some of our superpowers is like helping other people get a little more free. So yeah,
Absolutely.
So gender fabulous. That's my
you.
honorific for you. So
Thank you. I received that.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Okay, so Derrick, before we go, number one, thank you for spending so much time with us and sharing more about Queerly Health. I know that's going to help a lot of people tuning in. Where can we find more about your business and what you're up to?
Sure, you can learn more about Queerly Health at www.queerly, that's QUEERLY.health. And that's our website. And we're also at Queerly Health on social media.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And for Outbosses, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. As always, it is a privilege to connect with you and so many inspiring bosses like Derrick. So for details from today's conversations, you can go to outentrepreneur.com. If you'd prefer to use your phone, you can text OUTBOSS, all one word, to 444-999. and we will get you in touch with the show. As a next step, we always love if you subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. It's one of the best ways to get the show out there to everyone. And for now, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.